Welcome to the Kentucky History Channel, where we strive to bring you all the Kentucky history content you want and you deserve. Kentucky is a part of all of us, and we plan on covering all the history we can, from Pike County to Fulton County, from Louisville to Harlan. Here on our YouTube channel, you can find many videos dedicated to different events, people, governors, and places in Kentucky. There's something for everybody. While you're here, if you like the channel, hit the subscribe button and the notification button so you get notified anytime new Kentucky history is available. And if you want to support the channel, we have a Patreon page as well, or patreon.com/kyhistorypod. You've probably heard about Daniel Boone, but what about the rest of the frontiersmen who came to Kentucky and settled? That's what we want to bring to the Kentucky History Channel. The stories of the untold, the stories of those forgotten. One thing to expect on our channel is great Kentucky content. Some stories that you've never heard of. The Night Riders, who began in western Kentucky. Bloody Monday, the riots in Louisville. The assassination of Governor Goebel, the only governor ever assassinated in the United States. Stories from all over Kentucky, stories that are unforgettable once you've heard them. You can find out who counties in Kentucky are named after and how your county got started. From beginning to end, we plan to document every county in Kentucky, all 120. Reach out to us on all of our social media platforms. Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And also leave a comment on one of our YouTube videos. You can also check out our podcast episodes. You can subscribe to our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and many more. Welcome back to the Kentucky History Podcast. I'm your host, Jamison Cable, and we're here again with David Kirkpatrick, and we're going to continue talking about Benjamin Logan, one of the founding fathers of Kentucky. And all this leads, of course, to George Rogers Clark trying to get help and support from Virginia. And eventually that does work out. They do get the three new counties or they get a new counties, and Kentucky County is one of them. So we were at Fincastle, and now we've become Kentucky County, Virginia. And that's kind of important. Militia officers are appointed. Benjamin Logan is made a captain. The sheriff and justice of peace. I mean, to get three titles in one whim is pretty good.
That's a lot of faith people have in you there.
Yeah. But now, as all that stuff kind of settles up, we get to the point where things get, the war is really getting heated up, really starting to go, and you get the British push, and I guess I should say the British and the Native American push in Kentucky. Like I said, a lot of people kind of forget about this part of the Revolutionary War, the things that was going on, but things were fighting and quite regularly for the frontiersmen. In 1777, known as the Bloody Sevens, things really start to kind of go. So, there's three forts. You got McClellan, Harrodsburg, and Boonesboro. McClellan was to the north and was very small and very quickly abandoned after John McClellan died. And then you had Fort Logan, which was completing, which was kind of complete during this time as well. It was not as large as Boonesboro or Fort Harrod. It had 3 block houses were built in each of the corners. The fourth being a conventional cabin. And if you've ever been to these forts, Fort Harrod, Fort Boonesboro, and even Fort Logan, you can kind of see that the block houses are just kind of bigger. They're kind of a 2-story cabin, one built on the other. The size of the cabin was 100 feet by 90 feet. So if you think about that, they're not that big.
Not at all.
If you've been to these forts, you've kind of seen how how small. They're not big. You know how small these places are, and you think of living quarters. That would be very rough. 3 cabins were built on one side of the fort, with 2 blockhouses on the corners, and then 4 on the other side where there was just 1 blockhouse. 2 gates on each end were made that could be opened and lowered quickly. A ditch was dug to a spring to help supply the water, which a lot of these forts, had springs or something dug to get water to them. They just did not have, was Harrod built, or was which one? Was it has a spring in it, right?
It has
And
a spring inside it. Yeah.
That was the only one when. Which you would kind of I would think that would be a good idea to have a spring inside your fort, but I guess you just can't really navigate that. You can't just have that happen.
You always pick, yeah.
You can't just say, well, let's move that spring 10, 50 yards this way and we'll be good.
A handy trick, though.
The location of the fort, like many, was very important. It was, and I say that as opposed to the state overall. Like it was south of Boonesboro and Harrodsburg, or Fort Harrod. And if you think about it, if you look at the map of Kentucky, you've got Madison County, Mercer County. Both of those counties sit north of Lincoln County. And the reason that was so important is in any event of a Native American attack or a British, invasion of so forth, most likely they would attack Harrodsburg or Boonesboro first. Because if they were to attack Logan first, they'll most likely Logan's Fort or the men at Logan's Fort could send out runners or so forth, and they would send out runners to Harrodsburg and Boonesboro. Once those people were warned, then they would be coming in to the north of the invading army, and in theory, you would be trapped. You wouldn't want to attack the southernmost when you got 2 other flanks. You would already be, you would kind of be setting yourself up for an ambush, or just you'd be surrounded.
Absolutely.
But that's some pretty good military talk from me, at least. But that was the point of it. That was one thing. You just they kind of risked being cut off of their retreat if they were to attack and be unsuccessful, or even if they were successful, they could still be trapped. William Logan was born on December 8th, 1776, and 2 months later, the family occupied Fort Logan, which is quite an amazing thing to think about. That they had a baby, and 2 months later, they tracked the baby across the wilderness to a fort in the middle of the wilderness.
Yeah.
I cannot. I got plenty of 2-month-old trips to Kings Island or to
That's bearable in an air conditioned car with.
Yeah. So some of the first families to occupy the fort were Ben Pettit's, William Whitley's, William Menifee's, George Clark's, not George Rogers Clark, James Mason. There was also 6 single men that were there, and the Samuel Colburn's family came a short time after.
Important people.
So go ahead.
The Colburns were important people, so for Harrod anyway.
And that, if you think, you think about a, 7 cabins, 3 blockhouses. You got about 10 places you can kind of stay. That's gonna be crowded, even in, well, it's a small fort, but as the Bloody Sevens kind of began, there were many Native American attacks and deaths of frontiersmen. The only form of government for the settlers was the War Council, which consisted of John Todd, James Harrod, Daniel Boone, Benjamin Logan, and George Rogers Clark as president. So not a lot of support. And that's a recurring thing. We've talked about it many times during this time period of Kentuckian frontiersmen. Just not a lot of support from Virginia, which they had their hands full. So,
oh yeah, like you said, there's not a lot to spare, for the West, and The same time, you mentioned the Bloody Sevens because there's so much happening in Kentucky at that point. At the same time that pressure is being put on Fort Harrod and some of those places, that begins to trickle down, like you said, through the north down to Fort Logan. So in May of 77, Fort Logan's in pretty rough shape. They've got 15 men that are able to fight. And sure enough, on the 19th of that month, the Native Americans lay siege to that fort, primarily Shawnee warriors. Firing was returned back from the fort on between the two sides. And when you've only got 15 men there, everyone has to do their part. So some of the women, like Esther Whitley, who was quite a good shot anyway, and Jane Menifee, they're in the rotation. So someone fires a rifle and steps back to reload, or a musket and steps back to reload, while someone else steps up and fires out. So it was a pretty rough time, but the fort held its own. And by May 30th, they were feeling a little safer, and the decision had been made to seek supplies. And it's always a gamble because Native warriors don't do siege warfare very well. They don't bring supplies with them. But you never know exactly how far away from the walls of the fort they are. So Ben Harrison and three other men guard a group of women as they go out to milk the cows, and got to have sustenance to live on. So as they proceed to the livestock, it turns out that it was indeed a trap, and the Indians attack. Harrison and Hudson are both shot and wounded. Hudson would later be scalped and found dead, and Harrison was dead but left alone. So neither one of them makes it back to the fort. Logan and the other settlers did not know if Harrison was still alive or not. So you've got to make some crucial decisions. And I always thought this has to be one of the most difficult decisions you make if you're Boone or you're Harrod or you're Logan.
Mm-hmm.
Do you risk more lives by going out there? So one claimed, or William Whitley claimed, that he saw Harrison move and alerted Logan. So they called out to him, if you can, move your foot, and he did. So, rescue plan.
He's alive.
Yeah, based just on that evidence. And Logan and John Martin decided they needed some sort of protection. So they crawl out, being protected by a large bag of wool. And I kind of thought maybe the thought was this would absorb the blow of the musket ball, but it seems like maybe it gave some sort of camouflage as well, because they weren't really noticed until they abandoned the wool bag and picked Harrison up. So Logan's carrying him, and they run back to the fort, and a bullet strikes just outside the gate. Some people praise Logan for being very brave. Other people, like John King, not so much. He said it was kind of rash and pointless. But Logan was a leader. And again, as we've said several times already, when you're a leader, you care about other people. And so that's what Logan was doing.
Yeah. And there's always that one person out there who's going to complain about
that's right.
somebody's saving somebody's life. Yeah. And I mean, that's pretty much, if you ever go to the siege of Fort Logan, that's pretty much the story that happens. A pretty exciting thing. You oftentimes hear the stories of Simon Kenton, Daniel Boone, James Harrod, these eventful things where this epic show of heroism, and this was Logan's moment, one of his moments. He went out there and risk his life for another, and so forth. But again, May 30th, around that date every year, they have the reenactments. Again, go check it out. It's pretty cool. You may even see us there. But yeah, by this point, the natives had left by June 1st. It was estimated that the group had around 52 members. So, not this massive force, but again, the fort only had like 15. They were pretty low-handed, I guess. They had killed most of the livestock and had suffered very little damage. It looked as if only one had a broken leg, and that was it. There was really no sign of any casualties. The frontiersmen did not fare as well. Kennedy only suffered a few flesh wounds. Hudson had been killed instantly, but then Harrison died on June 13th. So one of those times Now hindsight 50/50, you think, well, what was that really? What was the need for that? But again, the man was alive. You got to do what you need to do to keep or save that person, or you would want that the same. And
Right.
again, Logan kind of showing that quick, tough leadership decisions. Even though Harrison did end up dying later on. Logan returned again to the Holstein after the siege, and was back at his own fort by the end of June. Another siege was in August. Same kind of thing. Uh, Surroundings had been cleared around most of the fort, so it was a little harder for the natives to gain protection, except on one side of the fort, which still had kind of an abundance of trees. If you think about that, uh, the bet John King and another garrison member bet who could climb a tree the highest feet first. The other members of the garrison won and lost because he was shot in the heel as soon as his foot breached the barricade. Logan did not know that any of this was going on, but makes me wonder about old John King. What was he really up to?
Yeah. You're battling two things. You're battling the Shawnee and you're battling boredom. And both of those things can kill you if you let them. So that's
uh, but yeah, I don't know about old John King. He's a rough one.
yeah. Well, during the time all this going on with the bet and things, Colonel Bowman's militia, who had been stationed in Kentucky for the defense, was headed to Fort Logan. So most of them were stationed in Harrodsburg. But it was as they were headed out to support Logan, scouts were attacked, showing that the native forces were still in the area. So they had left behind a scalped man, and when they searched his body, they found copies of a British proclamation signed by Henry Hamilton, who was the British governor there in Detroit. So this was really the first evidence of British involvement with the natives. It had always been suspected. You knew the British were maybe encouraging them to attack American settlements in the West, but here you have papers that proved, the British were aiming for you. So the pamphlets were given to Logan, but he was afraid that if the people understood really what was going on, they may want to retreat back eastward. So he hides them to prevent desertion. And it's something you kind of understand in the heat of the moment. If people think the British are doing that, then maybe they're planning an invasion force down from Detroit. So one thing that is a little more on the lighter side of things around now, we talked about this briefly earlier. One of the best ways to keep up your skill with a rifle or musket, which is not only how you feed yourself, but how you defend yourself, was a shooting match. So Bowman arrives, and there's a little more men to defend the fort, so everybody can kind of breathe easy for a second. So they have this shooting match, and William Whitley arrives and is watching these guys, take their shots at the target in the distance, and he's called on to shoot. So he hands a gun to his wife, and Esther Whitley, who was a fascinating character in herself, shoulders the gun, fires, and swiftly defeats the rest of the men with her marksmanship, and which did not set well. So several of these guys are out there long after she had left, trying to beat her shot throughout the evening. I picture it being twilight, and these guys are saying, "Come on, one more shot." But as far as I know, she remained unrivaled. So pretty impressive shooting.
Pretty impressive.
Oh
Which is
yeah,
the winner gets to keep all the lead, right? And I mean, that's
there
pretty
you go.
valuable.
So so William knew what he was doing. He that that was probably not the first time they'd been through that kind of scenario. So, but throughout all this, the county of Kentucky had not been officially established because no court had been held. One of the main jobs of the county government is to keep the peace and hold a court. So more men came to Fort Logan from the Holston to defend Kentucky. So Logan left again in October to get more supplies and prepare for that. The coming of that county government.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and again, Esther Whitley, man, that's the one we need to just do an episode on Esther Whitley because
That'd be awesome.
she's worth noting. What you think about just a woman on the frontiersman? Just I mean, out shooting everybody. That's impressive.
Yeah,
That's impressive.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Um, and so, after all this, 1777 pretty much winded down. 1778 picking back up though, and things don't. I mean, they take. I don't know. They really don't. It still stays pretty active. Things are still pretty rough. Everybody always says the bloody sevens, but it really you could say the bloody 1770s if you really wanted to get down to it. Um,
True.
but in but in February 1778, the fort was occupied and was barely surviving. On little meat, bread and butter, and milk. And there was a marriage taking place. Anne McDonald, a young widow, was marrying James Herod, the founder of Kentucky. Um,
Right. And I cheered earlier for the Coburns because she was originally a Coburn, but she had married a McDonald, and he had been killed, unfortunately, after they arrived at Kentucky. So,
there you go. But big connection, big connection.
yeah.
Which James and Daniel Trebeau. So I said that right? Trebeau.
Yes.
Yes. They kept a journal throughout the year, so that some of this stuff is gathered from the journals there. But the Clark's men they actually began to assemble in Fort Logan, and Clark was sent to protect the frontier again, and they are planning the Illinois campaign. Um, and in order to this is a pretty nice offer, 300 acres to sign up and go find Illinois campaign. That sounds like a win-win, right? I would say many takers for that, and it works out, But before this even goes on, Daniel Boone gets captured. Um, Logan helps organize a party that is led by William Whitley to raid native villages for horses.
Right.
Clark's army moves west to make a fort at Corn Island, which would become Louisville. Simon Kenton and William Whitley are joined by Captain John Montgomery. A lot of attacks happen on the roads, and the Kentucky men returned from Clark's campaign. I know that's a brief summary, but Logan's with them. I mean, like I said before, the 1777 was rough. But 1778 was pretty rough as well. A little bit more traveling, but not all of it, I guess, fought in Kentucky. But like I said, Daniel Boone was captured. Simon Kenton was captured. Um, Simon Kenton was captured, and all this kind of stuff was kind of big Kentucky events. Kentucky people kind of getting locked up or not locked up, but captured by the Shawnee and so forth. Those are
Right.
other stories to tell that I believe we've told. So, um,
Yeah, the George Rogers Clark episode, the leaping off of Corn Island for the Illinois territory, we talked about that some there. But the hope was that would alleviate some of the pressure at home. And, in some ways, I guess maybe it did for a limited period of time, but really not too terribly long because in September of 1778, the siege of Boonesboro takes place. And so, not only does Boonesboro have to defend itself, but they send out runners to the other forts. And that never fails to amaze me, too, how you can get a runner out into some of these other settlements, but they do on a regular basis. And
yeah,
so word makes it to Logan, and he begins to prepare a station for a possible attack. So, on one occasion, he rode a few miles away from the fort, and on his way back, Native Americans had shot at him, and he was hit in the arm, which caused his arm to go limp. And you think about it's something you don't see as much today in warfare, but they're firing these massive musket balls, and I guess it severed some sort of muscle or sinew.
mm-hmm.
So he let loose of the reins so he could hold on to his arm, and that gave the Indians a chance to catch up to the horse. And one actually got close enough to grab the tail of his horse, but wasn't able to hold on to it. So, realizing a change of tactic was needed, Logan put the thumb of his injured hand in his mouth and then rode the horse to the fort. And he would lose a bone out of the wound, but he made it back and he was alive. So that was the main goal. So rough life.
again, the toughness, man, to put your thumb in your mouth, of the arm that you've been shot in to keep it again. Whew.
Yeah, I can't imagine that.
Yeah.
Yeah, he
I
gets
mean, man,
worse news. Oh,
Well, I was gonna say it hurts me to, bothers me sometimes just to bend down on my knee.
oh, I know. Yeah, stuff starts popping and stuff. I can relate to that. But, they get him to the fort, and they get him bandaged up, and he gets worse news, which turns out not to be true, but he doesn't know it at the time. William Patton, who had been a resident of Boonesboro, came to Fort Logan and told them that the Boonesboro had fallen during the siege. And this scared the residents because they feared the worst. They were next, or Harrodsburg was next. And so they began to prepare for a siege and watch over the horizon. This is all territory they had traveled before. And if you're not ready, things don't go well. But they had a few scares here and there. Horses were stolen. Some cows were seen bristling with arrows. So they wait, and finally they see the natives, a group of men show up, or they think they do. And as the men draw closer, they realize it's actually people from Boonesboro that had left, Fort Logan. So the people were ecstatic when they realized, Boonesboro survives, and some
Mhm.
people even wept with joy. So Kentucky had held on to see another day. And not all was well in Boonesboro, though, because once the siege is over, they get back to the matters of trying Daniel Boone for treason. He's court-martialed.
Yeah.
But they ended up doing that at Fort Logan. And, I've always wondered, do you know of any reasons why that happens at Fort Logan? Was it just because that's where the court was, I guess?
I would guess, yeah, like, as opposed to, like, Fort Herod. I mean, I can understand not doing it at Boonesboro, um,
Sure.
but, yeah, I guess that would have to be it, just that's where court,
That's
I
what
guess, I would
it,
guess that would be it.
maybe it was more impartial because Boone and Herod had words. I don't know. But
Yeah.
whatever the cause, Boone is acquitted of all four charges. So he goes back east for a little bit with a wounded ego, but alive. So
Yeah.
William Whitley also returns from trying to capture horses. He was not successful, but the leadership was back intact. Kentucky had survived another siege, and they
Mhm.
had held on another year.
Yeah, yeah, and, that's kind of, that's, I mean, survival again, we've mentioned it before, but that's pretty much the way it goes. Yeah, I think, that's probably a good place to stop for the moment or for this episode. It's a pretty good, I think summary establishment of where Benjamin Logan came from and his leadership. I mean, I think a lot of things that we've talked about, it just shows again and again his leadership and a different, if I'm to compare it, I would say more on, you know, James Herod kind of leadership as opposed to say like Daniel Boone leadership. Nothing against either one of them,
Sure.
but more about establishing a place. Logan made an intent. We're going to build this fort. He got people around him to help to be there, and he stays there as we'll go for the most part of his life. Um, and again, more about establishing the state of Kentucky, I guess, to say it that way.
And as you said, Logan, because he's willing to think of other people and in more of a Herod style, when he first tries to found St. Asaph's and he doesn't have the manpower, people are pushing on to Fort Herod. You can be ornery and rash and say, well, I'm going to do it anyway.
Yeah,
But that would have been suicide. So the judgment Logan showed in retreating to Fort Herod for the winter, coming back in the spring with more families. Again, it prevented what happened at McClellan Station and some of the other places we talked about from happening there. So it really
yeah,
is a testament to his leadership.
yeah, yeah. He definitely pushed forward and established the second oldest town in Kentucky,
That's
Stanford.
right.
Spoiler. uh, um, well, that's good. Anything else to add? We'll come back and talk more about Benjamin Logan soon because well, he deserves it. But anything else?
That sums it up, I think.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Take care.
Welcome to the Kentucky History Channel, where we strive to bring you all the Kentucky history content you want and you deserve. Kentucky is a part of all of us, and we plan on covering all the history we can, from Pike County to Fulton County, from Louisville to Harlan. Here on our YouTube channel, you can find many videos dedicated to different events, people, governors, and places in Kentucky. There's something for everybody. While you're here, if you like the channel, hit the subscribe button and the notification button so you get notified anytime new Kentucky history is available. And if you want to support the channel, we have a Patreon page as well, or patreon.com/kyhistorypod. You've probably heard about Daniel Boone, but what about the rest of the frontiersmen who came to Kentucky and settled? That's what we want to bring to the Kentucky History Channel. The stories of the untold, the stories of those forgotten. One thing to expect on our channel is great Kentucky content. Some stories that you've never heard of. The Night Riders, who began in western Kentucky. Bloody Monday, the riots in Louisville. The assassination of Governor Goebel, the only governor ever assassinated in the United States. Stories from all over Kentucky, stories that are unforgettable once you've heard them. You can find out who counties in Kentucky are named after and how your county got started. From beginning to end, we plan to document every county in Kentucky, all 120. Reach out to us on all of our social media platforms, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And also leave a comment on one of our YouTube videos. You can also check out our podcast episodes. You can subscribe to our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and many more. We're always seeking to find more Kentucky history so we can bring it to you, the viewers, the listeners. We want all the stories and all the events from Kentucky's great history to be told and shared everywhere.